maybe not the only storytellers. Maybe we're not even the main storytellers. Maybe we're more like actors in a story, or agents of a story that puts into words something that is much bigger than words.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Charles Eisenstein. Charles Eisenstein is a public speaker and author. His work has to do with the history of human civilization, economics, spirituality, and the ecology movement. Key themes include anti-consumerism, interdependence, and how myth and narrative influence reality. According to Charles, global culture is immersed in a destructive story of separation, and one of the main goals of his work is to present an alternative story of interbeing. So this is the 100th episode of the Back to the Future podcast. So this is a very special occasion, and truly you are the person that I wanted to do this with. So I feel humbled and happy. Thank you for being here and for being. The podcast is called Back to the Future. So let's go back before we go to the future. Tell me about Charles when he was a small boy.
Well, let's see. When I was a small boy, I was shy. I liked to read. I liked to think. I liked to just sit there and think. I liked to play. I don't know if I liked to play by myself or if that was kind of the only alternative. I think I was shy but also lonely at the same time. I would, even though today I come across as very mental and very in my head, I was actually pretty embodied. Like I would spend hours throwing this frisbee and chasing it, or throwing a ball against the side of the house, and I would make up all these games. I really enjoyed physical things, actually, now that I think of it. And I don't know, that's like a little bit. I think you have to ask me more specific questions if you want to know more about that.
Great. So you're a person of stories, in a sense. We usually think of stories as fiction, but we're all made of stories. Science is a story, history is a story, the future is a story too. When did you begin thinking about narrative and how stories are at the base of everything?
Yeah, that I started to develop that way of thinking when I wrote my first major book, The Ascent of Humanity, which I wrote starting in the early 2000s. And that's when I came up with this understanding of the story of separation that constructs our whole society and that inhabits our own minds. I began thinking at that time about the power of language to create reality. And also, one of the stories in particular that runs our society is the story of objectivity, which says the world is not actually composed of story. So it's a story that says that story is just this overlay on top of an actual objective physical reality. So as I began to disassemble that story and consider alternatives to objectivity that fence in the world in concrete concepts that say this is and this is not. It is this or it is that. To define everything in words and numbers and measurements, so as I saw the limitations of that, I began to think of the alternatives. If the world isn't at the base level made of number, what is it made of? So another story is that the world is made of stories. which doesn't mean that humans create the world. That's one of the big um, uh, misunderstandings, I think, of what story is. We're maybe not the only storytellers. Maybe we're not even the main storytellers. Maybe we're more like actors in a story, or agents of a story that puts into words something that is much bigger than words. So that's a little bit of the background of this way of thinking. It sounds like really abstract and stuff, but it gets extremely practical, especially today when the world, especially my country, but the whole world is basically we're tearing ourselves apart because of the different stories in which we're immersed.
That's so powerful in the sense that I studied deconstruction in philosophy, and I think it was one of the main ways that in the West we started feeling that the objectivity of science was created, and that in the West we've taken I don't know 20, 30 generations since, I don't know, the Renaissance or the 16th century, where we started really doubting that. And I know you spent a lot of time in Asia and in other indigenous ways of seeing life, and also in the non-Western societies. There's not, we don't see this separation between subject and object, world and self, and mind and matter, and all those things. When you lived in those places, did you perceive another way of being in this world that wasn't so dualistic?
Yeah. So let me excuse me. Let me first say that it's not that Eastern or indigenous or non-Western, non-modern cultures don't see the world in terms of self and other, or don't see the world in dualistic terms. It's just that that isn't the only way that they see the world. They can occupy that seat and wear that lens, but they're not limited to that. So, and also, like, I like to think, in terms. I like to use a term that my friend Orland Bishop uses to refer to. It's a bigger term than just indigenous. He says he uses the words cultures of memory, and that would include what we call indigenous cultures, but also it would include other traditional cultures that may, be a settler culture that then became kind of indigenous. I mean, indigenous means of a place. And it also could include lineages, esoteric lineages within modern cultures. So there could be subcultures that are cultures of memory. And it's not a rigid distinction. So when I was living in Taiwan, it was a rapidly modernizing society, but there was still a very strong thread, still visible, of an agrarian society with a completely different worldview, a different pace of life, a different understanding of time. And so, yeah, I more than any explicit teachings about Taoism and Buddhism, it was coming into contact with living holders of that memory of human beingness that affected me the most.
I know we're being reductionistic by calling these big names of dualism and Western, and but an essay that you wrote really spoke to me, which was To Reason with a Madman. And this essay, really talked about your recent feeling of futility, where we are trying to convince each other using arguments, and that wasn't really moving forward, not in the political, nor in the science, not in even the social arenas. And you talked about the power of fiction, in a sense, of actually creating stories that we can't argue. We can argue with the interpretation of the story, but we can't argue with the story itself. And at the same time, the last 2 years, you've written a lot about expository prose. how are you reconciling these ways of talking and writing?
Yeah. Yeah, this was, I don't know that when I wrote that essay a year or two ago, but I had been for a long time becoming more and more impatient with the limitations of expository prose because of the resistance. Because if you're making an argument, then you're inviting arguing. If you're saying this is, then you're inviting people to say, no, it isn't, that is. So it tends, like, no matter how persuasive and eloquent you are, you're inviting people into a true or false, yes or no mentality. And to some extent, I try to preempt that in my expository writing. I say things like, you might be thinking something, something, something. I try to include all of the different reactions to it in real time. But still, there is that limitation. Whereas, as you were saying, a story, you can't argue with a story. I mean, it's not, because it's not an argument. So it gets underneath intellectual defenses, especially, and it may be that you tell a story and it does actually challenge somebody's worldview. Like if somebody thinks, for example, that, gay people are awful, horrible people, and you tell a story about, your best friend who's gay and how generous and kind he is, like that is going to still be a challenge to that person's worldview. And they might make a story that preserves their worldview. Well, this person's an exception, or, Charles is, they might be able to make some story, but nonetheless, something gets in. So so especially in really polarized times, sometimes we're left with no alternative, like no argument, no conversation, no debate can actually be had. No one's going to change their mind when the most important thing is being right. But a story, it gets underneath those walls, and it gets in. And the thing is, people love to hear stories. You automatically have somebody's attention when you tell a story well. And if you let go, the more you let go to, and here's the moral of the story, then the more receptive people will be to the story.
I think that's a challenge, right? Because you want to make an argument, you want to leave a moral, and at the same time you have to let go entirely of it, and even risk that the story might be interpreted or felt in another way that the writer wasn't supposed to, or at least it wasn't his intention. So in this sense, I believe stories and experiences of non-duality are important to keep bridging. And I don't like the word bridging because it entails a separation between entities or stakeholders. But if we are thinking about, we in this podcast, we talk a lot about systemic, complex, multidisciplinary thinking. And, the complexity of having this understanding that everything is interconnected in ways that we can't really fathom, it really overwhelms us, and it gives us this feeling of smallness and lack of agency, and we might end up being just indifferent or just powerless. And an experience of non-duality, an experience or a good story might not give us the whole understanding, but at least it makes us feel part of it, and that we are agents, and that we are important in this co-creation. So again, how can we keep reconciling this complexity of reality with stories that give us the experience of being part of this? And you use the word interbeing, which I guess, in a sense, changes our intellectual approach, and it's a more holistic, not not preserving the intellectual, obviously.
Okay. Yeah. So I do talk a lot about the story of interbeing, a word that's taken from Buddhism. Thich Nhat Hanh spoke of interbeing a lot, and it narrates who you are, what a self is in a different way, and what reality is and how things work. Instead of a separate individual, you are something like a holographic embodiment of everything, or you are the totality of your relationships, not only depending on plants and animals and the sun and the water for your survival, but for your existence on the deepest existential level. They are part of you, regardless of your conditional dependency on them. Their existence is part of your existence. So as we inhabit that story, then because everything inside mirrors everything outside, and every relationship that we have mirrors a more general relationship that's everywhere in the world or even everywhere in the cosmos, then our felt sense of the significance of our inner work, of our experiences, of our interactions, of our life choices has an intellectual correlate, an intellectual justification. The logic of the heart and the logic of the mind come into unity in the story of interbeing. And it's mysterious. Like you can say, well, if my personal choices are so significant, if my choice of peace in this tense situation with this ex-spouse or with this coworker, if that choice of peace is so important, then well, what about everybody else who's making a choice of war? What does it matter my choice of peace if there's so many other people also making choices that affect the whole? Like that's the mind of separation trying to make sense of it. But so yeah, as long as we're still conditioned to the logic of separation, there's going to be a conflict between what our minds say and what our hearts say. But so in that scenario, I would offer that the choice of peace shifts you into a reality in which other people are also making a choice of peace. And what happens to those ones who aren't making a choice of peace? The more that you make a choice of peace, the less that they even exist. Now, is it that they are you just don't come across them anymore? They don't invade your space anymore and you're living in a bubble? Or is it that the world is actually changing? Again, the mind of separation wants that distinction. But if you even the terms of that distinction already embody the assumptions of separation. So this is getting super metaphysical. I know that, especially in an oral format. I hope it's not confusing, but because for me, I've thought about these things so much, so I can just spew them out. But it takes, for me anyways, taken many, many years of careful thought to be able to have these insights about separation and interbeing.
I think I in a sense, I get you. But again, we are trapped in language also, right? Because even if you thought about this for years and you can explain it in terms, language is also constructed in a way that it entails a story of separation. The words we have at our disposal in English, it's already preventing us to talk about something that is outside of language, in a sense.
Right. Yeah, like English with its reliance, and other modern languages too, but especially English with its preponderance of nouns, with its construction of is. As long as I say, well, the self is this or isn't that, I'm already, as you're saying, I'm already exercising the vocabulary of separation. However, language has another element that is not imprisoned in the terms of separation. It is the voice. Language, at least spoken language, and even actually written language, there's a communication that happens. There's information in it that is not reducible to the semantic meanings of the words. So right now, I am communicating with my words, but I'm also communicating with my voice. And it may be that, and this is the poetics of the language. If I am speaking from an experience or from a authentic connection to a possibility of beauty, of peace, of love, it's going to come through my voice. Even despite the limitations of the words, there's still something that is not limited by language. Because language really, it's breath. Spoken language is breath. There's more to it than these philosophies can speak to. Written language less, but still, when I write, I am actually reciting it, and I'm trying to imagine, like, what it is like to read it, and so I pay a lot of attention to the cadence of the words. I might choose a word not for its meaning, but for its sound. So there's some of that communication that can happen in written language too. And again, like in this polarized, divisive environment, you could very easily be in a situation where the meaning of your words will provoke nothing but resistance. And so if you're aware of this other level of communication, you can influence somebody, even if they don't agree. They don't agree with anything you said. You can still reach them. You can still transmit information to them that's not about agreeing. I mean, it's the same idea as with story. It's not about whether you agree with an opinion or not, but you can share something of yourself and share something of what has informed you. Because yourself isn't a separate self. Actually, yourself is the totality of every experience and relationship that you've ever had. And that can be, you can tune into certain of those experiences and transmit them in your voice.
And you started recording your own essays, and I can see that you enjoy doing that because it takes another dimension to the words. And it changes when you read them or you hear them, absolutely. And I think it's ironic and paradoxical and even poetic that we also want to transcend the medium the way we communicate. Like, for example, we are recording a podcast here, but we are talking about other ways of transmitting information that are hidden from the semantics. So I think this is a powerful insight in the sense that if a lot of our civilization is structured through words, through the written law, science, it's if it's published, if it's in books, and we want to materialize our knowledge and whatever in our hierarchies, but at the same time we know this heaviness, this this heaviness that will entrap us, and we want to live in a way that we can, yes, write, but also speak and flow with the fluidity of things that are not really being recorded.
Right. Yeah. So a spoken word does not only have a meaning. It actually means something a little different every time that it is spoken, because it is in a relationship. And I know that if whatever I could say, a sentence, I could say something to you, and if I say it to somebody else in a different time and place, it's going to mean something different. It's going to land in a different way. It's going to have a different effect on that person. Therefore, it's kind of out of your control. Like, you can't cut the world up into little pieces and master all of those pieces, all of these concepts, all of these nouns. This ideal, though, of control, this ambition to organize the world into true and false, into this and that, is embodied in law, which tries to clearly define exactly what is legal and illegal. But you always will have a situation where somebody obeys the letter of the law, but violates the spirit of the law. And they're like, well, I didn't break any rules, you know? And so the response of the person who is trying to conquer reality in this way will be to say, well, we need even more laws. We need finer distinctions to take into account that particular kind of situation. And so you end up with more and more and more laws. But somehow you never reach the paradise of an exact correspondence of law, written law, with the spirit from which it comes, or law and morality, law and ethics. There's always something missing. And even paradoxically, the more that you write down and the more explicit and precise that you make it, the more the spirit escapes. It's like trying to grab water in your hands, you know, and it's leaking out. I better hold on tighter. It doesn't work. And I think today we're encountering some of the limitations of the general program of domination, of domestication, of making all of the world, putting it all into our fences, all into our categories, all into our words, into our concepts. That's the crisis of our time.
Yeah, we've moved from, like, for example, the Bible having this metaphorical, allegorical way of talking about laws because they wanted to preserve the spirit, and then we wanted to put everything in clear terms. But I do believe that if paradigms will continue shifting, we will have to jump into that abyss of yes, having laws and trusting them, but also trusting indecidableness of meanings and opening them up for another way of giving agency, not through control, but just through a morphic resonance, in a sense. Mm-hmm. And it's a leap of big faith. It's a leap to a big abyss, to really, because, you know, uncertainty will happen immediately, and we have so many mechanisms to fight uncertainty. So jumping into interbeing, in a sense, entails a lot of fear and a jump into what we've never felt that we could be there, because all of our control will be gone. So the question is, how does Charles Eisenstein for the past years have been jumping in those abysses, and how does it feel in this roller coaster of managing different ways of being here and communicating?
Gosh, Victor, that's I don't know, it's a pretty abstract question for me. For me, I guess a lot of it is this habit of trying to manage people's responses and to stay safe, which isn't so much, you know, I mean, that actually comes up more in my in like the semantics, you know, in the expository prose, because I'm staking out a position that I think, or I'm saying something that I think no one is saying and that needs to be said. And that's, whenever I touch a controversial issue, that gets me in trouble. And then what happens is I'll lose part of my audience forever. They'll write me off forever, and I'll gain a new audience. But then I'll say something controversial that they don't like, and so that, for me, that's the fear that I've been facing. It comes down to like psychological stuff about, is dad going to approve of me? Are my friends going to like me? That kind of stuff. Yeah, like the whole first part of our conversation, I've been feeling a little bit like it's been a little bit abstract. I'm actually not that interested in metaphysics right now. Sometimes I'll go there, but if it's not tethered to like an actual concrete problem, I tend to lose interest. And so for me, this is something that's a lot more juicy. Like what, I guess part of it is like, what am I actually trying to accomplish with my communication? Is it to express a necessary truth as I see it? Or is it to manage and control the world? That's what I've been facing a lot of. So that To Reason with a Madman essay you talked about, part of where I was coming from is it was fear of like being too direct with certain controversial things, but it was also a weariness of, just with the futility of trying to, because okay, so in The Ascent of Humanity, I had a whole section called The War on Germs, laying out the fallacy of this us-them setup, talking about the importance of body ecology, and having a flow of genetic information through the body, and like that the idea that health requires community, like all this stuff, and warning about where the war on germs could take us. I painted this dystopian fantasy where everybody's walking around in a personal protective bubble. So, and I've revisited that theme again and again. It wasn't controversial, no one was canceling me or deplatforming me or denouncing me for saying those things, for saying it's really important to get sick sometimes. It's really important to share germs. It's really important to get our hands dirty. It's dangerous to use, antiseptic hand sanitizer all the time. Like, no one was denouncing me for that. And then all of a sudden, my dystopian fantasy is coming true before my eyes. And on the one hand, I'm like, my last 15 years of work did no good whatsoever. I gave this clear warning. And here we are in this convulsion of extreme separation beyond what even my dystopian fantasy had envisioned. And so like that was the context, I think, of that essay. I was just like in despair. Like, my work isn't doing any good. It's not doing any good. To Reason with a Madman, it's not doing any good. It wasn't even controversial, yet like people agreed with it. Yet when push comes to shove, it's as if I had never said it. And I'm like, have I spent 15 years saying things that are as if I never said it? What should I do about it? And okay, like maybe my perception at that time was not accurate. Maybe it did have an effect that is, maybe it would have been worse if I hadn't said those things. Or maybe once we go through this, then the things that I and people like me have been saying will come into their own. I could make a story about that. But at the time, I just felt this tremendous sense of futility and despair. So I can't remember how I began this, but yeah, so okay. That though, what I chose to do after that was to keep doing it. because there was part of me that just wanted to play it safe. And when I saw what was happening and envisioned the world that my children would be living in if this continues, I'm like, I have to speak what I am seeing and face this fear. And I did that. And that's when like the denunciation and the cancellation and the deplatforming, and to this day, I'm still blacklisted from a lot of, platforms and organizations who I used to be like a treasured speaker for, and now I'm like, consigned to the ranks of the deplorables. So,
Yeah. And, I think, you talk about the more beautiful world our hearts know it's possible in a overly intellectual or at least mental, rational society. We do need insanity. We do need to be, in a sense, heretics of whatever we want to uproot or transform. And this is the jump that I guess you lead us, and not only because we, let's say it this way, we might agree or not agree, but we respect the courage it takes, and I think that is another way of showing new doors for our future.
Yeah. Two things. One is like, it's possible that I was wrong about some or most or all of what I said. But I know, at least for myself, I know that I was brave. I was afraid of something and I did it, and I faced the consequences. I faced the fears. I learned about what I was really afraid of. And so for me, it was quite a initiation. There's something else that I wanted to say. Yes. When society has such a deep investment in a certain story and believes the assumptions of that story as if they were undeniable truth, then if you want to change that, you use the word heretic. But I would even say, like, you will be seen as crazy because you will be denying what people think of as objective reality. When you say a more beautiful world is possible and you start to describe parts of what you've seen that go against what people are told is real, then that's crazy, right? If you're in denial of reality, that's crazy. So where I'm speaking from, like, for example, having seen things in Taiwan that blatantly blatantly violated what I'd been told is real and possible, like stuff with Qigong masters and Chinese medicine and like, Taoist shamans, like ghosts, like people's ghost stories, like this entire culture of folk Taoism, feng shui, like, and you could like look at it in anthropological terms as the system of superstition. But what I saw with my own two eyes is that these things are actually working and experienced in my own body. And that was the beginning of where I'm speaking from today. And since then, I've encountered so many things that don't fit into science is real. Science says, like, and it happened. I saw it, where people I deeply trust experienced it. So I'm speaking from that place, and therefore I'm speaking from a place that is in violation of reality for those who are immersed in standard reality. And I mean, the weird thing is almost everybody is secretly crazy, because almost everybody has had experiences that violate standard reality, but we don't show it. We don't dare say them, because, then you get canceled or you get ostracized or you get ridiculed. It's embarrassing. People often will. Now, this is changing, however. The stigma around these reality violating experiences is diminishing. And that is actually a very significant sign, a very significant trend in our society, because it means that reality is falling apart. Standard reality is dissolving around the edges. And along with that, it's not just our story of what is real that is dissolving. It's also all of the systems built on that story. All of our systems are in severe dysfunction right now, and in certain ways falling apart. The public health system, medicine, education, the economy, our entire industrial system, all of these are in crisis. And that is deeply related to the breakdown of reality itself as we have known it. So as it breaks down, then we also get to see glimpses of a new reality in every field, from agriculture to medicine, everything we call holistic or alternative. That's showing us a new reality that is available at the other side of this breakdown. But I see no alternative but to go through this dissolving. And to make it easier, at least we know that there's a destination that we're heading towards. There's another system, another possibility. It's not that we have to rebuild what we already have.
Thank you. And I think that you are still very, in a sense, you have also skepticism, and you are more like a wanderer who's just questioning instead of just moving into the other team of criticizing science and technology. Is that you have a line in one of your essays, I think it was Parallel Timelines, where you say, my inner scientific is rolling his eyes at what I'm writing right now. Like, and I think that's the thing. It's not we're choosing one or the other. It's like we are trying to keep creating new narratives that entail different aspects of reality. And you started the first question that I made. You said these Oriental societies are not. It's not that they don't see dualism. It's that it's not the only way that they exist. Right. And in that sense, I think it's powerful to. It's not easy to be in a place where you are, in a sense, you are eroding the soil where your structures are being built, and at the same time, you want to keep building. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is not. I'm not offering a repudiation of science and to say that science is totally wrong. It's really about recognizing its limitations. And to do that, we should even talk about what is science. What do we even mean by that? And I would say that really what science is, it's the study of the measurable. It's the study of quantity. If you can't weigh it or measure it or count it, then it's not scientific. You have to be able to quantify things. And the problem isn't that we should. It's not that it's bad to ever measure or weigh or quantify things. We can achieve certain things, certain objectives using those methods and being in that mindset. But we have to recognize its limitations. Science itself does not admit its own limitations because it's one of its fundamental, and I'm talking now science with a capital S, okay, as an ideology, as a religion. One of its primary dogmas is that everything is measurable. Everything real can be measured ultimately. Maybe we don't know how yet. Maybe we cannot yet measure love, but someday in the mythology of science, we will be able to quantify love, and we will be able to measure your neurochemistry and your hormones and so on and so forth, and tell you if you are actually in love with somebody or not. It can be, so therefore it can be reduced to number. There's nothing beyond number. So what I'm advocating is not, again, it's not to cease using the tools of science. but it is just to admit as a starting point that not everything is measurable. Like what happens when you stand in that story? Then you are able, you first, you tune into things that would otherwise be, that you wouldn't even notice. And then you can develop whole other realms of technology that are not based on quantification, which is also a form of domestication. You're reducing the infinity of the world and the infinite variance of the world into a set of numbers. It's a conquest of sorts. So this goes along with a psychological and cultural transcendence of conquest, and therefore a different story of humanity, a different mythology of our collective destiny. Why are we here? What is our goal? It is no longer in this new mythology, which is also very ancient, but it's no longer to become the lords and possessors of nature, as Descartes put it. It is something else, maybe to participate in creation, to attune all of our capacities to the unfolding of life and beauty in the cosmos, something like that. And all of that is so that there's a deep linkage between that alternative to conquest and the recognition of the qualitative that can never be pinned down and never be predicted or controlled.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big thing. We don't know how to do it. Our systems are not geared for it. Our habits of thought, our social, financial, epistemological infrastructure. So yeah, it will take time, I guess. And that's another thing, like the experience of time must also be decolonized, de-standardized, decapitalized, in a sense, to enter in that realm. And how has your experience of time evolved, I guess, in the past, say, 30 years? The Charles Eisenstein of every day, having children and writing and working and traveling, has your experience of time changed because of these reflections and bets?
What's happened is I've noticed very deep-seated programs and habits of the scarcity of time, habits of hurrying, habits of anxiety, thinking that there's always somewhere else I'm supposed to be. There's always something else I'm supposed to be doing. My time is limited. I can't just be in this moment because this, and this. It's a constant state of anxiety. And it had been beneath the threshold of consciousness. And in recent years, it's been rising to the surface for me to look at, and therefore offering an opportunity to develop new habits. When you actually see something consciously, then that's an important stage in transcending it. But I would say that I'm still, very much a beginner in throwing off the colonizing shackles of clock time and the habits of the clock. Mm-hmm.
And I think as a writer, you sometimes even, because writing takes a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
I can't really resist. You're one of my favorite writers. How do you take notes? How do you manage your time to write?
Let's see. Sometimes I procrastinate a lot, and I write a little bit, and then I get going to my email, and I write a little bit more, and then I look at Telegram, and it just takes forever. And then I'm like, this sucks, and I trash it. And then sometimes in a burst of creativity, I'll write something beautiful in a few hours that looks like it probably would have taken weeks to write. And in a sense, it did. Like all of that other stuff is part of the writing cycle as well. So And then sometimes I like right now I'm constructing in my mind, not right now, but like, when I was in bed last night, constructing in my mind an essay about abortion. And it just is like, it just revealed itself to me, like the whole trajectory of the argument, and the whole thing. And so then it's just a matter of doing the labor of writing it down. So yeah, it happens in different ways. I think I'd be a terrible writing coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you take notes on your phone, on a notepad,
No.
in your mind?
Yeah.
Okay. So this podcast is heard by a lot of health professionals, even students that are going into medicine, psychology, coaching, nutrition. And we try to think about health more than just the biochemical model and also the social determinants of health. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, where health is determined by education and environment and everything. And at the same time, we have all this realm of alternative, so-called alternative medicines. What would you say to let's say a 20-year-old medical student whose school is just focused on the Western allopathic, biochemical way of teaching medicine, but he or she knows that health goes much beyond that world, and he or she will find many contradictions in his education when he's facing patients with his own development as a human being. And it feels frightening because you want to have big parents that tell you how the world is, and at some point you start realizing that you have your own opinion on this. And I think a lot of people are having existential crisis when they faced worldviews that are so contradicting that the guidance they did now is more about trust and hope and confidence and love. So I don't want to answer the question, but what would you say to them?
So this really depends on who I'm talking to, and their specific relationship with the system that they're in. So somebody who's just awakening to the possibility of something beyond their education, I might say something different to them than I would to somebody who is disgusted with the system that they're in and is in a crusading mentality. And sees it as fully evil. And I might say something different again to somebody who is in a mature place of, yes, I know there's a lot outside the system, but I'm working within the system and trying to bring as much in whatever skillful way I can into the system. And, some people have a temperament suited to that kind of work. They're good at working in the system. Some people don't, so I'm not going to try to generalize it too much, but maybe one thing I could say that applies to people in many, many different places. I would just like reinforce or invoke their trust in themselves, in their instincts, in their inner authority. Because so much of standard education involves an abdication of our authority to outside experts. And it's not that you refuse to listen to any outside experts because I know it all. No, it's that you take the information in and trust yourself to make good use of that information and trust your own orientation about what's trustworthy and what seems a little bit off. And I can't put my finger on it. And I don't even have to put my finger on it. I just have to be honest with the tone of that information and my own body reaction to it. And so all of these things feed into self-trust. Partly it's trusting your direct experiences. If you even have one, I hear this all the time, like Stella, my wife, is a healer, and she but what was the story I just heard? Someone had like a rare and highly aggressive form of cancer, and the oncologist, it's like, okay, we're going to have to start chemo in 2 weeks, et cetera, et cetera. And, or I don't know how, whatever it was. So instead, he goes on the Gerson method of, cancer therapy, and skips his appointment and eventually shows up with the oncologist, and the cancer's in remission. It's gone. And the oncologist says, well, we're still going to give you chemo because, just to make sure. And so here that oncologist is not taking in a direct experience, just writing it off and encouraging the patient to write it off too. So if we could, when I talk about inner authority, I'm not at all talking about obliviousness to the experiences of others and to what's happening in the world. It's actually quite the opposite. It's an openness to all experiences, really to take them in. That's where reliable inner authority comes from. It comes from openness. If that oncologist took in even this one data point, it could change his life, and it could change his career. And so that's what I encourage people to do, whether they're in the system or not, but especially if they're in the system, like, pay attention to the anomalies. What do you have to banish from reality in order to stay in the system? And what does the system have to banish from reality in order to maintain its integrity?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's holding that space for that person is probably the best way of being pedagogical. Just, I'll hold the space for you to create your own intuition and to follow it. And I think that's something that we don't really strive for at least in Western societies. Charles, I want to thank you a lot for this conversation. We went philosophical also because we didn't really introduce ourselves and we just started recording.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you. Your books and articles are really an inspiration for me and my community. That's why I invited you for this special episode. And I just want to thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Victor. I enjoyed it. I feel like it took us a little while to really land.
Yeah.
But maybe next time we prepare some topics in advance. I don't know, but I thought it was good.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. I did have a lot of things prepared, but at the same time, you just have to go with the flow. And in a sense, you're producing a conversation that it's spontaneous and it's not really feeling an agenda or just trying to answer the question your audience has or what you want to entertain them. So I guess that's also a very true conversation. It doesn't matter exactly what we say. So thank you so much, and all the best to you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, Victor.